Hello, everyone. This is Patrick Studebaker from the Road to Freedom podcast. I just wanted to come on and explain a little bit about this episode. We were going to do 2 news stories and an introduction to the NAP, but we ended up going a little bit long on the news stories, so decided to break it up into 2 different episodes. So episode 2 will be 2 different news stories, and then episode 3 will be the introduction to the NAP. So you're going to hear just a conversation between Matt and myself, and then it'll cut off, and then the next episode will be the NAP.
Welcome to the maybe 1 or 2 people now who are joining us once again for the Road to Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Studebaker.
And Matt Martin.
My friend. Today we have some juicy topics to talk about. We're talking about follow-up to our stadium issue that we have here locally, and who would have thought the government's poisoning our water supply now?
Who'd have thunk?
So we also have a discussion today of what the non-aggression principle is, which is the basis for all true libertarian idea. Essentially, if you don't subscribe to the NAP, it's a hard stance that you have to take to call yourself a libertarian. There are other political thoughts that you can have if you don't subscribe to it, but we'll get into that. First, pretty much a day or 2 after we did the podcast, Forbes.com released this article about how will a new stadium make your city richer? And, you know, Matt, I know we're always worried about the government listening to us, but if Forbes.com is going to give us articles pretty much a day or 2 after we do our podcast, not even release it, I'm okay with private companies listening in on our phone conversations.
Yeah.
So just to remind everyone for what we have here in Kalamazoo is we have a private company who is attempting to build up a downtown area of a city in a county that is going to attempt to use county taxpayers to fund a single stadium of some use of some unknown makeup design. They don't know where the property will lie specifically because they haven't found out who already owns that property, would be willing to sell that property right out. And they want to make the taxpayers responsible for what essentially has been a boondoggle in every other city location. So Forbes has this article questioning if stadiums actually would make your city richer. And so they picked the North Carolina Panthers Stadium. I guess it's housed other ones like the 2012 Democratic National Convention, some NASCAR races, and they question whether or not just in hotel use it would make money for the hotel and make money for the city in general of when these events go on. And what it says here in the article from Forbes is that some events do actually do good in the area for the hotel, which is understandable. You have more people come in, you're going to use your services, of course, you're going to see an uptick. But then some others do not. There are people that come in just for the day, park, and leave. So this idea of saying, oh, it's always going to help, or it's in the net positive going to affect hotels, restaurants, etc., that's not always the case. They said that in the article that annual hotel tax revenue of $280,000 they attribute to the North Carolina Panthers, right? Panthers are in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a sports person, obviously. I use the example or use the analogy of moving the football for freedom, and I always have to say, is that the home run one or is that the 3-pointer one? So clearly, I'm a great sports analogist. But they say that less than 1% of the $33.4 million that Charlotte had to pay in 2016 to service the stadium, arena, venue-related debt the city has incurred is what that $280,000 from hotel tax revenue came out. So barely 1% of what it takes to do the upkeep. and of course, when you're reaching in the pockets of other people, you're you're also having to tell people about the upkeep and the pay for the people in the stadium. There are other factors involved, and I mean, how many weeks are there in football? 28.
16 or 17.
Yeah, so not all of those are going to be home games. So what if you're just looking at this team and saying, oh, this is a multi-million-dollar franchise. We're of course we're going to get huge funding from this. Well, what, eight? Let's say 8 games are home games, and you're assuming that the stadium's going to be completely filled up, and the hotels are going to fill up because people are coming in from outside whatever area it is to witness this. I mean, especially in the early weeks, the people probably aren't going to care too much about the Panthers.
Well, yeah, and then you hit where, if the team is doing crappy that year, and if they're playing a crappy team, not as many people go. They go to the bigger name teams when they play.
Yeah, or they choose the local team because, the college kids or the AAA leagues or whatever. It's just more fun to watch them because they have the ability to play harder because they want to get to the next level. They want to see the scouts pick them so that they can get paid multi-million dollars to put a pigskin down the field. So the article goes on to say here that but the people who work at the hotels will spend money, which will generate additional tax revenue. And they say, that's a good point. So let's assume that all hotel spending ends up back in the city's hands. Even if the city scoops up literally all the additional hotel revenue that is attributed to the Panthers game and let none of it for the hotel employees, owners, and so on, Panthers-related hotel revenue would still only bring in about 10% of what's needed to cover the debt payments. And it's not reasonable to think the city would walk off with literally every cent of additional hotel spending attributed to the Panthers game. And, I mean, this is what we see in other types of government spending, like the assumption of the healthcare that Bernie Sanders was always pushing. It's if you took literally all the rich people, stole their money, 100% of it, you would cover it for 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, but the rich people are going to leave then.
What? No, that's never going to happen. Rich people don't have easy access to mobility and easier access to find loopholes to get their money out of the country. That's just not possible, Matt. You're crazy.
Not in Bernie Sanders' world.
Yeah. The Laffer curve does not exist in Bernie Sanders' world.
No.
Matt, I should say that we are a podcast that are two normal guys who are liberty-minded that want to learn more about libertarian thought and ideas, and that's the whole point of why we decided for this podcast. So, can you boil it down, Matt? We all know what the Laffer curve is, obviously, but for those 5 or 6 year olds who are listening to us, what is the Laffer curve?
Well, the Laffer curve is it simply states that the less you tax people, the more you'll actually get in tax revenue. Like, for instance, the rich people who can afford to find loopholes, can afford to hide their money in bank accounts that America doesn't know about. If you're making them pay 40%, they're going to do that. They're going to hide, and then we're not going to get as much taxes paid. But if you were to bring it down to maybe like 25% or just something more reasonable, which any taxation is theft, though, I mean. But if you bring it down to something reasonable, then more people will be like, oh, well, I'm only having to pay 20% in my taxes now, and you're going to get actual more tax revenue paid in than you would if you just raised taxes.
Right. So, if you have that lower tax revenue, you're also not using more government funds to pay agents of the IRS to go and investigate. And so you always have to think about, it's not just money coming in, but also money going out. How much does it take to fund the IRS, the agents, and the accounting software, and everything that goes along with that? So that's all that Laffer attributed to his. I mean, it's a nice little graph. It's really simple and easy, and I would say a good majority of economists believe it, or at least recognize it academically. But they're sometimes, especially on the Keynesian politics spectrum of the economic spectrum, tends to disavow how much truth is in that. But back to the article. the article says, well, you might say, but people do more than spend on hotel nights at the Panthers game. This is also true, but it still doesn't justify the subsidies. Assume people spend exactly twice as much on game-related stuff as they spend on hotel nights, which triples the tax take, because hotels have a luxury tax. It's some tax. We have it here in Michigan, in our city for hotels. There's always the sales tax and then the luxury tax or convenience tax, which I forget what exactly it's called, but it's definitely on all hotel bills. But Panther game related tax sales revenue is about 2.5% of what Charlotte had to pay in debt service in 2016. So just the very fact that it's their debt, it's not even a profit of what they would make. Just the debt service.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting is like I feel like with these city brought in or the city funded taxpayer funded stadiums, since it's taxpayer funded, they're not really in it for the profit, so they don't think about all these things. Where if you took like a private company to build a stadium, they're gonna think about all these things beforehand and be like, well, am I gonna make money off of this? Will it, in the long run, how long will it take me to actually, make a profit? But these city-owned ones don't care about that because they just want more. In reality, it just seems like they just want more people in the city, but they're not actually making money off of it.
Right, and there's other factors involved too, like traffic patterns and just the wear and tear of a stadium or the parking lots, and the very fact that there's always a lender of last resort, to use a bank analogy, is you can always go back and say, well, the stadium's fledging here, we're going to get, we're going to lose votes if we turn it over to a private company to kind of recoup some of our value. But it's always easy just to reach again into the pockets and say, okay, now there's a stadium tax. And again, a lot of this stuff, it's not just on the city or in the immediate area's vicinity, it's on a county level. There are bonds that are created that, yes, people vote for it, but if people of a city think that they're going to get more benefit out of it, they're more likely to vote, and you have a bigger congregation of people than in the outlying townships or districts.
Yeah.
I thought this was an interesting example. So they brought up how there was a 2017 PGA Championship in Charlotte here, and the expenditure for public safety was $330,000 for just the event. So it's a 4-day PGA Tour event. It has the same effect as the Panthers' 8-game season. Hey, look at that! I think I did say eight home games. So
you got it right.
Here I am. I'm going to start throwing off baseball statistics from the 1964 Cincinnati Reds. But they say that estimates suggest that it didn't. The additional hotel tax revenue wouldn't cover the city's outlay for tournament-related public safety. And I thought this was an interesting point, too, because obviously here they're just looking at the economics. But if you have more police that have to be hired, you're going to hire them not for just events. I mean, you might have reserve officers that come in and just do stadium stuff, but you're going to have people that need to have the ability to, arrest drunk people and to stop vagrants from pestering the rich people down at the stadium who are coming in to spend money, who you want to encourage as the city to come back and spend money in different ways. So you're going to have a larger police presence, especially when there's stuff that's not going on in the city or in the stadium. You're going to have a larger, essentially, police state. So if you need, 2 different shifts, 36 more officers because of union rules, the average increase per officer per shift is going to increase because a lot of times there's shift minimums that the union requires, and you also have a larger police presence in the off season.
Yeah, that's going to have everybody losing out on money because they're just going to hire. I mean, you can't just hire seasonal cops. So they're the whole year for these 8 games and whatever other kind of events they might hold at the stadium, they've now hired that many more cops that they have to pay the entire year.
Right, which we know personally when there are local events that are done in a privately held stadium, there are seasonal security people, and you don't even have police presence half the time. You have the ability to call them because for some odd reason you're not allowed to protect your property in a way of holding people or just shoving them out the door. But you have the ability to have contract workers come in for a short period of time. And we've seen that. We've seen that for even larger events that get held in the stadium that's more than just the average hockey game.
Yep.
All right. So we thought that was a fun and interesting article that came out pretty much a couple days after we did the first podcast. And we still don't have a website, so we're not going to post that, but we'll have to check the numbers. And because we can't just reach into the coffers of the public, we have to make sure that this is a product that is willing to be purchased or listened to, obviously for free.
Wait, we can't just tax the people and then hope it makes us a profit down the road one day?
Well, I don't know if you're rubbing elbows with the elites in power, but I definitely do not. The most I do rubbing elbows with people are farmers who decide to jump on a township board.
Right.
All right. So most of you probably remember that in a couple years ago. Gosh, when did that news story break for the Flint water crisis?
Oh man.
There.
Like 2014, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was early in the 10s. So yeah, 2012, 2014, Flint had an issue with lead in their water supply, and of course, it's the appropriate blame is on the government because they're the ones that made the changeover from what they were doing to a different water supply that caused them to have more contaminants pass through them. So that's a good example of what we saw when we had government intrusion into something that is considered a public utility, but obviously would have been better off if we had a private holder, or at least somewhere in the middle of the line, a private entity to help provide water to people. But here in Kalamazoo, we have two townships, Parchment and Cooper Township, that have been tested and found to have 26 times higher than the federal health advisory, which I'm sure the federal health advisory is a perfect amount of levels to have, of this PFAS contaminant. And I've tried pronouncing the pyrophosphoric, whatever it is, but PFAS, as we'll refer to it. An estimated 3,100 people using the Parchment Municipal Water Supply were told late Thursday to immediately stop drinking the water after high levels of the substance were discovered in municipal water sources. It found out that it leaked into Cooper Township, which is a neighboring township, and then also I think Kalamazoo Township may have had some as well, and even some of the well water was found to have it. What was interesting about this incident too is, again, it's a government-run water supply, but there was a report done in 2012 where the DEQ, which is the Department of Environmental Quality, they had warnings about the contaminant being in the water supply. This state representative's Brinks said, "What can I say? Or what I say is that they knew about this 6 years ago and did nothing about it until this year. So those facts speak for themselves. The fact that there are other states that have done less does not excuse their inaction when they had the knowledge of the significant health risk for 6 years ago." They said that the report, for whatever reason, never saw the light of day, and now we're paying the price. I guess it was given over to the governor, and just no one picked it up. This report reminds me so much of the possible warnings of Muhammad Atta attacking the Trade Center, or at least carrying out the terroristic plot, sitting on Condoleezza Rice's desk, or this is the possible cabling of Japanese incursion into the Pacific to attack Pearl Harbor that may or may not have been seen for the kickoff of World War II. So it just seems like, hey, they did this testing that it was found to be really high. Did no one hear of Twitter or Facebook in 2012, or when the Flint water crisis happened? Let's say it happened in 2014, 2 years ago. There's not someone who did those testing and went, hey, you know what? Maybe we should tell somebody about this so that we can get up and rolling.
Yeah, it seems to be the problem with the government is it's just so easy to bury those kind of tests and not talk about them that, and they don't. I mean, it's almost like they just close their eyes, like, oh, I didn't see it, it didn't happen.
Right. Well, and I was just reading a news article today about how McDonald's has used or has had a big infection into their salads and affected people in something like 18 states. So
Wow.
again, private companies have their issues too with hurting people, but the protections that they have, where it's like, well, we're not required to disclose certain things, or we're not required to do these testing because the government says we don't have to. Um, you know, you're going to have the ability to um, sue McDonald's. You're going to have the ability for McDonald's to change. You're going to take money out of their corporation that will hurt them, and then hopefully they'll make changes based on that. If not, they'll go out of business because no one will eat there. But you can't do that with government forced utilities. There's no way that the government is going to say, well, we really did a disservice. Here's $100,000 for 5 years, so that the birth effects that happen to your kid because of this PFAS is affecting you, and we're also going to be going out of business after we pay off those debts. No, all you're going to get is an ability to have them take more money to fund this. They're going to say, oh, we didn't have these 1,200 people looking at this water supply, so let's do it now. And when people are in a state of fear, especially for something that's already forced upon them, they're not going to think, oh, well, we can't do nothing. We need to give them this money. So it's always been that way. It was that way when 9/11 happened, when it called for an increase for Homeland Security funds, and the U.S. Patriot Act occurred because of that. Well, we can't just do nothing. Yeah, we failed, but now we need to increase the TSA, even though there's been adequate evidence that it does nothing to curb terrorism, and that it's 95% ineffective at finding things that are brought through.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy when you think about that. Where if it's a government entity, something goes wrong, so they're like their main idea is, well, let's just put more money into it, fund it more. Well, why would we fund it more when it didn't work in the first place? Why don't we find some different way to do that?
Yeah. Well, and
Have
there's
someone
always
else do it.
there's always this idea of like, well, then people vote on it, but not everything has to be taxed in the direct line that, oh, it has to go to the voters. Sometimes it's just done. It's done through different accounting means that they have the ability to say, okay, this is the thing. Is that your legislators voted on it, or this city commission decided to do this, and they're still constrained, at least on a local level, which is good, about how taxes happen. But taxes on a federal level, let's say, if we build it up, when's the last time during the presidential election you vote on a federal tax as well? Well, you didn't. Those are just created, and it's a use-based tax. It's, hey, we need this amount of money, so we need to increase, how much we take out of people's paychecks by this percentage. And there's no vote. Oh, well, you have representation. No, you have people who want to maintain power, who are far away from you, who are taxing you without consulting you.
Yeah.
I wonder what that sounds like. I wonder what that sounds
That
like
sounds-
from the maybe the 1700s area, maybe a little closer to the 1800s area.
Unfair or no unfair taxes and no representation in Parliament.
Yeah,
Something like that.
yeah. So, the fact that there's a misunderstanding that, oh, if you have private entities that come in, that there would be people who wouldn't get water supply. I mean, you're talking about, oh, well, if people just drink this free poison, well, at least they get a little water too. I mean, there's no understanding of having a private entity who can be taken to the woodshed for these type of things. There's an incentive to do testing, especially if you're a sole company that's looking to make sure that outside competition doesn't come in. If you had the ability for people to set up competing businesses that got people cleaner water, you would have an increase in value and quality of your services. That's just how competition works.
Yeah, and whatever happened to the days? Because I mean, let's say the crazy things that people are against privatization. I can't say that word. Privatizing the water. Let's say the craziest things happen where it comes true and people aren't getting water. Whatever happened to the days of just digging your own well? Then you've just become your own water supply and you're fine. Like, I mean, if one company's not giving you the water, the clean water you want, you go with another one, and if that's not working, dig a well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in one of these articles, it talked about how you shouldn't purchase any private water filtration or anything like that. Granted, there were already scams that were coming in to people about setting up filtration systems, but there's just it's like, oh no, wait, the government hasn't authorized any water filtering stuff to come in. So if it's not been approved by us, we don't want you plebes using Brita water filters to guzzle down this poison water that we gave you. There's just an understanding of, oh, you're an infant. Let us hold your hands. We're the smart ones, even though we're the ones that end up doing this to you. I mean, there's no trusting people to make logistical decisions, or for people to say, hey, here's the best one I found, and have private water testing done as well. It's this idea that if it's not government sponsored, like everything else that's gone wrong, like the food pyramid or anything like that, is unsafe. It's the same thing that we see with scientific studies. Oh, if the Wrigley's Gum Company sponsored the best way to freshen your breath, and it was found that brushing your teeth and also chewing gum to break up plaque enamel. Well, you can't trust that because it was found to have a positive effect for Wrigley as well. It's like, well, you don't think government entities have interests in the studies that they carry out too? I mean, that's asinine to think that the government's just going to allow a study to be published that says, oh, well, abolish the sanctions or the regulations in place could help prevent all this. Have more direct competition come in. There's no way that they're going to be allowing that as well. So it's not just one side.
It would take away from their power.
Right. Okay. Anything else?
Nothing I can think of. I did find an interesting thing that, the Parchment City water is so bad that they actually have to. What is it? The city of Kalamazoo, luckily, is under the acceptable range, and they have to drain all of Parchment's water supply. Then they're gonna power Kalamazoo City water through it until it finally goes below the acceptable levels, and then once that happens, they can finally they're going to use Kalamazoo's water supply to flush into, so people in Parchment can get water again. And it just makes you think how much more money is being just pumped into that now. And then what happens then? I know they're thinking of a short-term fix, but what happens then if all of a sudden you do some retesting, you find out Kalamazoo's water is contaminated? It's just like a never-ending cycle of just more money, more problems.
Right.
More money, more problems.
It's always this understanding of short-term fixes for long-term wants. And that's what government does, because you only have the people in power thinking about until the next election cycle. And if the election cycle is, 5 years from now instead of, 3 months, then you have less of them that would care about, fixing the issue. And if they're trying to fix the issue, they're going to find the quickest fix possible to tell people, okay, you're safe now. But yeah, what if, there's a pocket of this PFAS stuff that Kalamazoo hasn't tested in a certain area? Or what if there are different contaminants that mix with this PFAS that create a bigger health concern? What if it doesn't just kind of go in and dilute the water? I mean, it seems like this suggestion on what to do came relatively quickly. So it's a wonder who are they consulting to figure out the best possible solution? Is it just the people that allowed the poisoning to happen? Or are they consulting with other government agencies? Are they consulting with experts? Who are they bringing in to make these determinations? Or is it just, oh, we'll dilute the water and that'll do it? That should do it.
Yeah, and the other thing is like the from what I understand, at least the testing they're doing, they're not going around testing every single well, all the water supply or anything like that. They're just like picking and choosing. They're almost doing like a generalized like, oh well, we have 40 wells and we tested 25 of them and we're good. It's like for this kind of thing where you're contaminating people's drinking water, they can't shower, cook, or drink with any water. Like, wouldn't you want to go around and test every single every single well you have, all your reserves, 75 different points in this one pipe? I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and at the end of the day, they'll say, okay, everything's good now. Trust us. Well, that's what they did last time. And you decided to poison people. So again, it's not saying that private companies don't have the ability to poison people as well. It's just that there are deeper ramifications for this. If it's found, if ABC Water Company found in 2012 that this harmful chemical was there, and they did nothing about it, people could be sued. The company could get shut down. People could go to jail for this type of stuff. But is there a government worker who's going to go to jail for any of this stuff? Is there a payout that's going to happen that's going to hurt the city water supply company? No, of course not. You can't shut down the city water company. That's the only one that's there. That's the one we have the marketing or the monopoly over. And this has been an issue of having water issues in this area for a while because of the government. The city has supplied water to certain different areas within the county, and the rate of their bills that came out were insane, and people weren't paying them. And so you had managers from the townships come into the city, and it's a literal Mexican standoff where if the townships sue the city will go bankrupt because they're what the service that they would have to pay for and the back pay for all whatever is there would bankrupt the city. And if they just let it go, well, then they're not getting the service from the contractual agreement that was agreed upon. So they've been in this Mexican standoff for years, and they meet once or twice a month to just say, oh, we're going to sue you. Well, if you do that, you won't get anything. Oh, you're right. Well, see you in another month or two. So this is exactly what happens when you have a forced monopoly, when you don't have the ability to have people come in and run it as a private business. The water supply is scarce, so you regulate it through the market, so that way you have the best quality for the best price. And if you have competition come involved where you can choose between ABC company and XYZ company, you figure out which one's best for you, and you enter into a contract with them.
Yeah, about the whole thing you said earlier about, with private companies, you're going to, they contaminate water and they hide it like the government's doing, and you're going to see people go to jail. I saw an interesting thing. I didn't read the article, but I just kind of read the tagline when I was looking at articles for this, that Rick Schneider was just left off of the lawsuit facing for the Flint water crisis. When, I get it, he's the governor, and even if he was in the lawsuit, he's not going to serve any jail time. He's not going to actually have to pay out. But it's just interesting that now he's left off of it, when in the long run, those papers had to come across his desk, and he had to sign them in order to switch the Flint stuff eventually.
Right.
So you get the highest official who at some point he was involved in the decision, and then you're just leaving him off on a lawsuit. That wouldn't happen with a private company.
Right. It's much easier to fire the top head. And people say, well, you can just vote people out. Yeah, but you have to wait like 4, 6, 2 years to do so. And there's a recall process. There's a long process involved in that. But heck, half the time, when a stock for a private company dips 2%, the CEO is out and they get somebody else in. I mean, the fact that, oh, just, well, vote next time. It's like, yeah, but what if you don't want to vote for either of the two parties, or you vote for, the other side, whichever one that might be, could be third party, libertarian would be great.
Yeah.
Did you then consent to that other person? I mean, what if the next person that comes in says, free money for everyone, but I'm not doing anything to help the water supply? People vote that person in, but you care about, not having your children be unable to gain weight for 6 years of their development after they're born because of what this PFAS does. You're stuck. You didn't authorize this person to give out free money and to not care about the water supply, but then there's no recourse for you because again, it's a public company, and you have the tragedy of the commons. You just don't have people that have an incentive to care other than, well, if we screw up too much, then we could go to jail, or there could be a fee that the city pays out, which on a city level, on a local level, again, that's why we encourage local action. You have people that will, it'll hurt more on a local level. But again, it depends on where you're at. We see that with police payouts. It comes out of taxpayer fund money. There's no de-incentive for police to change, or I should say, there's no incentive for the police to change their actions if they beat up a handcuffed person and they pay out $1 million to the person. It's just coming out of public funds already. So when you sue a police department, you're actually essentially suing yourself. There's no reaching into the union funds or any of the retirement funds for the officer that did the beating. It's directly taken out of the public's cost.